Today, we open the mailbag, talking MASN Plus, talking Brandon Hyde, talking what to do with this starting rotation. Coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to open up the mailbag with the Orioles being off on Monday night, answer some of your Orioles questions, touching on topics like MASN Plus, the new streaming service that MASN announced on Monday. We'll talk about the jobs of Brandon Hyde and Hyde and Elias, and we'll talk about some different things having to do with the struggles that this starting rotation has gone through. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So we're going to open up the mailbag here. Thank you to everyone who sent in your mailbag questions. If they did not get answered on today's mailbag, don't you worry. They could get to them on a future mailbag episode. You can always leave them right here in the comment section of the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And of course, you can leave them via email, lockedonorioles@gmail.com. We can talk some baseball. Also, you can leave them in the review section on iTunes and Apple Podcasts, where you can rate, review, and subscribe to the show. That certainly helps out as well. So first question today comes from Carol via email, but others had talked about it a bit, and it really was the big news from Monday out of Birdland, and that is MASN Plus. And the question is, how will the new MASN Plus impact us as fans? Now, what is MASN Plus? MASN Plus is finally, here in 2025, the direct-to-consumer streaming option for Orioles games. MASN and the Orioles announced it on Monday. It will include the Nationals and the Orioles for this season. But as we know, the Nationals are leaving MASN after the 2025 season. They are open to pursue their own broadcasting rights deal in 2026 and beyond. But MASN Plus will include the Nats for this season. Again, what is it? Direct-to-consumer streaming, which means blackouts are gone. You know, you pay for MLB TV, you live in the Baltimore area, you cannot watch the Orioles. That is no more if you pay for MASN Plus. And the Nationals and the Orioles are now the 28th and 29th teams in Major League Baseball to offer direct-to-consumer. After doing this, only one more team in the league that hasn't done it. The O's very, very behind in offering this in a cord-cutting world. Not nearly as many people have cable as they did 5, 10, 15 years ago in their household. So the price point is going to be about $20 per month. And if you want to pay for the entire season, it will be $90 for the remainder of the 2025 season. Now, my assumption is it'll be either $100 or $110 for the full season in 2026 and beyond. But because, they didn't launch it until April 21st, because we're already 21 games into the season, bit of a reduced price at $90 for the rest of the year. And in terms of price point, that is on the lower end of these direct-to-consumer options that are being offered across Major League Baseball. So not bad for the fans with that price point. Now, let's talk about the pros. I wanted to just do the pros and the cons of this MASN Plus. What are the pros? Well, first of all, blackout-free streaming for Orioles games for the first time ever. If you are living in the Baltimore area, not just the Baltimore area, not just in Maryland, but in what MLB has decided is the region for the Orioles, which includes parts of Pennsylvania and Delaware and West Virginia and even parts of North Carolina are in the blackout zone for the Orioles on MLB TV. You can now purchase MASN Plus and you can stream Orioles games. You have not been able to do that before. I know many out there do not have cable. That includes myself. You can now stream the Orioles on your phone, on your laptop, on any device without a cable subscription. For now, the apps that it's on is iOS, so your Apple devices. It's on Android. It's on Apple TV, if you use that as a streaming stick or streaming service. It's on Roku. It's on Amazon Fire TV as well. And those are really all the big ways that people stream shows, stream movies, and stream live sports in this way. This is a really good thing, I think, for Orioles fans. You no longer need cable to watch the Orioles if you live in Maryland or live in one of those other areas that I mentioned. This will give access to so many more fans to be able to watch the Orioles on a nightly basis. And while it won't be a huge one, it'll also add another revenue stream to the team that hopefully they turn around and use on the player payroll. That would be nice. It's hard to ask an owner to do that. We know how billionaires operate, but it could be nice for a little more cash in the pocket for this front office as well. But it's twofold because it's so nice to have it. But again, Orioles and Nationals teams 28 and 29 out of 30 in the league to do it. They have been way behind. And it just shows you, like, when John Angelos was in charge of this organization just 2 years ago, he made it seem like it was close to impossible to do this, when at that point, more than half the teams in the league had offered this direct-to-consumer option to their viewers because so many people were cutting the cord, getting rid of cable, going to streaming things like YouTube TV or other things like Roku and Apple TV, and just having, like, subscriptions to Netflix and Paramount Plus and Hulu and things like that. This is huge. This is huge for the household I live in. We do not have cable. We have some streaming services. We have some places where we can get this. We add MASN Plus. Makes it much easier to watch the Orioles night in and night out. Now, there are still some concerns. This is fantastic for the streaming fan, but I have my doubts. And while if you're on a laptop, you can stream directly at masnsports.com or masn.com, I worry about the other devices, the phone, the iPad, the Roku, the Amazon Fire TV stick, where you're using the actual MASN app to stream. Because for the last couple of years, the MASN app has allowed you to technically stream games. Now, you had to sign in with your cable provider, the cable you already paid for that included MASN in its package, and that allowed you to, if you weren't at home, still watch the game on your phone or on your laptop if you were elsewhere, but only if you already paid for that cable service. That was the kind of small streaming option that MASN already had. And it wasn't great. You hear so many people complaining about the crashing of the MASN app. The stream is bad. The website's not good. There were a lot of issues with that. And the MASN app is going to be where you buy MASN Plus and watch it on all of those devices. I worry about the state of the MASN app. I can tell you right now, it wasn't the greatest app put together when it was developed and launched a few years ago to kind of add this first smaller streaming option. And I'm not sure what the overhaul looks like for it, but people have had a lot of issues with buffering, with freezing, with sign-in problems, all that stuff just when it was with your cable provider. Now there's going to be so many more people using the MASN app who are paying for this MASN Plus to be able to finally watch the Orioles again after cutting the cord. It's going to add a lot more users to that app. And I worry that just the technology of what they've put together, which has already struggled, is not going to be ready for another influx of users. And I worry it's going to crash, it's going to buffer, it's going to freeze, and it might be a little rocky for a while. And the Orioles launched it Monday and they said it's usable. I believe the plan is tonight, Orioles Nationals, you can watch it on MASN Plus if you paid for it already. Now, I'm interested to see how well it works as people try and stream, and I'd be willing to bet some good money there will be some issues on night one tonight, but we will see. I hope it all goes well. The other thing is, we don't know for certain, but usually a package like this that's been around Major League Baseball only includes the games on MASN. So you will not get all 162 games with MASN Plus. You'll get 150 to 155 of those 162. And for many people, that is good enough. But any game that's on ESPN Sunday Night Baseball, any game that is on the Friday Night Apple TV Plus package, any game that is just like a Fox Saturday national game that's not on MASN, or anything that's Roku Sunday morning, you're not going to get. And with the Orioles, being a little disappointing, but generally been a playoff team the last 2 years and get some of those national TV windows. There's even some Fox Thursday night games later in the season as well. That's going to chop off 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 games of your 162 that aren't going to be in that package. You're paying for about 150 to 155 of 162. So that is going to be a little annoying for people because there's still other streaming services you're going to have if you want to watch all 162. And then the postseason as well. You got to have something to be able to watch the playoffs once all the games go on national TV. But I think overall, a good thing for the Orioles, a even better thing for Orioles fans, just as long as the MASN app works and is able to handle it. Next up, gotten this question a lot in an annoyed way, but some people ask it in a serious, respectful way as well. So let's talk about it, right? The Orioles have not been good. They are 9-12. What's the status on Brandon Hyde and Mike Elias at this point? We'll talk about that coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. And it's great that FanDuel makes betting so easy on the app, whether you're picking your favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. So don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. So our next question on this mailbag episode, it comes from James on YouTube. It came from Julie via email, and it's come from many others over the past few days. At what point would the Orioles consider moving on from Brandon Hyde and or Mike Elias? And also kind of posed to me, Connor, as well, at what point would you be calling for the Orioles to move on from Brandon Hyde and or Mike Elias? I do want to say, first of all, a 9-12 start after back-to-back playoff seasons is not getting anyone in those positions fired. So anyone who's here on April 22nd calling for Brandon Hyde's head, it's just not going to happen. This team has gone to the postseason back-to-back years. Yes, it's been a rough start, but it's the first 21 games. We are still in April of a season that ends in September. There is plenty of baseball to be played. Despite the starting pitching struggle, there's plenty of talent on this Orioles team that's gone to back-to-back postseasons. This is not the time. So let's start with Brandon Hyde, because I think most people would agree if either was to lose his job this year, it is more likely to be Brandon Hyde just because of the position he is in as manager versus general manager. Now, I think, and I think this is how the Orioles see it somewhat too, the O's would have to get to a point, probably in the second half of the season. I think it wouldn't be anything until at least post All-Star break, where it feels extremely unlikely, gets to a point where it's extremely unlikely where they would be able to turn it around and still just make the postseason this year. Now, I know a lot of the pessimistic fans are going to say at 9-12, they're already done. Their season's over. It's 21 games out of 162. They could be 0-21 right now. And although it would be bad, it wouldn't be over. Now, it'd be different if they're 0-21. This podcast probably have a different feel to it, except that they're 9-12 and they're still very much in this thing 21 games in. Now, the other thing we know is Hyde is not going to be fired solely for wins and losses. If that were solely the case, he would have been fired in one of his first 4 seasons when the Orioles lost seemingly 1 million games each of those years. But we knew what Hyde was there to do. He was there to keep that team together as they put a really bad product on the major league field, as they rebuilt the organization from really the bottom up, and it worked. They won 101 games in 2023, won the division, got back to the playoffs in 2024. They are now securely in win now mode. The rebuild is done, and really in the 2 years that they've tried to do it, they have gotten to the postseason. We also know that they have been swept out of the playoffs twice. They are 0-5 in the playoffs. They have not even won a playoff game, let alone a postseason series under Mike Elias and Brandon Hyde. That is certainly the case as well. But again, it's not going to be solely wins and losses for making that Brandon Hyde decision. It's going to be part of it, absolutely. But it's also going to be about what the buy-in, what the vibe, what the messaging is like in the clubhouse at that moment. And if Mike Elias in the front office or David Rubenstein feel that Brandon Hyde's message is getting stale, he's, the team's losing, his message is getting stale, it's not getting things across, he's losing connection with the players, with the clubhouse, that would be the point they start to think about making a change in there. But it's also, that's not something we're going to fully see. We'll see if losses continue to pile up on the field. We'll certainly see that, and losses will make it more likely than wins would of Hyde losing his job. Obviously, that's the case, but it's not just going to be that. It's going to be stuff we're not going to see behind closed doors, what is going on there, because it's something I've talked about many a times, how teams operate in 2025, how most teams operate, how the Orioles probably operate between the front office and the manager and the coaching staff and the players, is that the manager in Major League Baseball these days, for most teams, including the Orioles, is not the same job as it was, in the 80s and 90s and even 2000s. It is more of a middle manager job. He is not putting together every single lineup, making every single move all on his own. There is so much input from the front office, and this is for basically 27 to 28 of the 30 teams operate like this, and the two that really don't are seemingly the Rockies and the Angels, and we know how much success they've had lately. That is how they put things together. So the manager job is so much more now about managing those relationships in the clubhouse, keeping guys together through a long, grueling season while still making tactical decisions. But it's a lot of those softer skills as well. And Hyde has seemed to, so far, as they've turned this team around, do a really good job of that, especially when this team was truly terrible in the rebuild year. So all of that is to say, I would say it's highly unlikely the Orioles would fire Brandon Hyde during this season, like actually while the year is still going on, unless like it goes terrible and they fire him with like 3 games left in the year and the O's are, 20 games out or whatever. I'm not counting that. I mean, something in like July or August. It's not impossible, but I would find it highly unlikely. And it's been done before. In-season moves have been made for coaches who, wow, I got to tell you right now, I just watched Alex Ovechkin score the game-winning overtime goal in Game 1 for the Caps over the Canadiens. So we're not talking about a fun Orioles subject, but that was certainly fun to see out of the corner of my eye. But I would say, again, highly unlikely. Now, teams have done it. Last year, the Mariners fired Scott Service, their manager who'd been around for almost a decade, I think, in Seattle. And they were 64-64. They fired him on August 23rd. They were 7.5 games out of the final wild card spot. They were playing 500 ball. It was getting kind of stale. And the firing kind of worked somewhat. They brought in Dan Wilson, who had been kind of around the team. He's like a legend from the 90s. And they finished 21-13 in their final 34 games, but they still finished a game out of a postseason spot. They still missed the playoffs. So it went well, but it wasn't good enough to get them into the postseason. And then the other really famous one was the Phillies in 2022. They started 22-29. They were kind of a disaster. They fired Joe Girardi. They instituted Rob Thompson, his bench coach, as manager. The Phillies turned it around and went to the World Series that year. So that's like the tippy top of what could happen. But generally, it doesn't go that well. When there's an in-season firing for a manager, it's either because the team was completely terrible or they were trying to spark something and it just didn't work. Like, there's a couple examples of it working, but it's generally not the best way to go because it also could cause you to lose the clubhouse. Maybe it's the change the team needs, and maybe it will help long-term, but short-term, you can really lose some guys by making that move. It's a delicate balance that you really have to weigh when making that decision. So I do think if a decision like that is made, it's more likely to happen after the 2025 season. Because again, for a guy who has helped take this team to back-to-back postseason appearances after how terrible they were for 4+ years, he deserves to at least see out the entirety of the first bad season after that and give him the chance to turn things around. If the Orioles miss the playoffs, and it's not because, they won 87 games and they missed it by 2 games and they were in the race the entire way. If the Orioles legitimately miss the playoffs, like let's say finish with a losing record this year, they win 80 or less games, by middle of September, they're completely out of it. It's not competitive down the stretch. They were just a straight up bad team this year. If that turns out to be the case, again, we're only 21 games in, but if that turns out to be the case, I think they could fire Brandon Hyde. It's hard to teleport myself 6 months from now to that position where the Orioles are really that bad, because I would have to see how it went that bad and what the season played out like. Was it way more injuries or did they get healthy and they were still bad? Those are two very, very different things. But if they get somewhat healthy and they still finish with a losing record and they're way out of the playoffs and it was just an awful season, I think they could fire Brandon Hyde. And I wouldn't be super opposed to the Orioles making that move if that were the case. Not because I think Brandon Hyde is a bad manager. I think he's done an absolutely great job since taking over in 2019, especially given the circumstances when he was first hired. But if they have this much talent and the team gets healthy and they still can't win this year, unless it's solely because they have no starting pitching, if other things go wrong, you might start to think, hey, maybe, he's been great, but his message is getting stale and it's time to bring someone new in. And I'd be okay with that. I think that would be a sane decision to make if the Orioles really did kind of fall apart down the stretch this year. But if the Orioles make the playoffs again, and even if they lose in the wild card round again, or they lose in the DS or whatever it may be, like Brandon Hyde's done enough to keep his job, and I'm going to be calling for him to keep that job again. If he gets this team to the playoffs 3 years in a row, especially with what this rotation looks like right now, if they turn around enough to get into the postseason, I think he's due to keep his job. If they don't, I think that is when we kind of have that conversation. Now, for Mike Elias, he's got a much longer leash because he is the architect, not the sole architect, but he is the architect of this turnaround. They've made the playoffs basically in both years that they have tried to, you can basically say, in 2023 and 2024, when they actually added to the team enough to do that. And maybe David Rubenstein, as a still fairly new owner, would make a power move. Again, if the Orioles finish with 76 wins this year and we're nowhere close to the playoffs, and Rubenstein, this year was his first truly full season as Orioles owner, and he decides, I'm going to make my first power move, and he's going to fire Elias and promote Sig Mejdal or promote Yves Rosenbaum or bring someone from the outside or whatever it may be. It's possible, but the way Rubenstein has talked about Elias and kind of letting Mike make the baseball decisions, it doesn't seem like something Rubenstein would do in his second year. It seems like maybe 2, 3, 4 years down the road, if it's still not going well, that's when David Rubenstein would make that move. So, and I don't know if he has like a guy he would want to bring in because he hasn't been in baseball for that long. So I think for Elias, it would take back-to-back bad seasons, like 76 wins this year, 74 wins next year in 2026. And they're just, they're not terrible. They don't fall apart. There's too much talent to do that, but they're not in it at the end either season to get to the postseason. I think that is when, by then Hyde would be gone. I'd be totally fine with that decision. But at that point, post 2026, I think that's when the Orioles would think about making an Elias move. But that is so far down the line from where we are now, a back-to-back postseason team that started 9-12 and we're still in April. You got to remember, we are so far from that. Like, the people calling for Hyde's head right now, don't you want to make the play? I just feel like if you're going to fire Brandon Hyde tomorrow, it's going to put you at a worse chance to turn this thing around and get into the postseason just because of the shock that move would bring. It's the same thing of like calling for players to get benched or sent down or whatever. Like, they're probably here because the next best option that's in AAA is worse. That's kind of how this works right now. So that's where we are. And that's kind of how it is with this Orioles rotation, right? It's not been good. You can call for as many guys to get released and DFA'd as you want, but here's the bigger issue. There's nobody healthy behind them that's better. So let's get to that next to finish off the show with a couple of mailbag questions surrounding the unfortunate state currently of this Orioles starting rotation. So it is not a secret that this Orioles rotation is bad. As we finish up with the last couple of questions on today's mailbag episode, they have been pretty putrid, if we are being completely honest. The Orioles coming into play on Tuesday, their team ERA, this includes relievers and starters, is last. That is 5.43, their team ERA. You move it just to starters, they are even more so last at a 6.11 starter ERA. Now, their bullpen ERA has plummeted to 4.59. A lot of that is Cionel Perez, Cody Poteet, and basically that is all Sunday. All of that is Sunday. 9 runs were given up by position players that count as relievers. Like, their bullpen has been good. It's just being destroyed by what happened basically on Sunday by mostly 2 position players. Otherwise, the bullpen's been good. The starting rotation has been a mess. 6.11 ERA. The next worst, the Colorado Rockies at 5.76. The only other team at above a 5, the Marlins at 5.74. Atlanta in 27th is 4.58. The Orioles in 30th are 6.11. Their FIP is only a little bit better at 5.50, xFIP at 4.76. It's still bad. It's still the worst FIP in the major leagues. It's still 28th in xFIP in the major leagues. They're the only team in baseball right now that has a negative starting rotation WAR. That is really hard to do because the starting pitchers generally pitch most of your innings, and somebody's generally got to be good. It is really hard to have a negative FWAR from your starters, but the Orioles at negative 0.3 are the worst. Atlanta at 0.3 is 29th. That is hard to do. It's because they're not striking anyone out. 15.4% K rate as a rotation, worst in baseball. They actually aren't walking guys, which is nice. 7.8% walk rate. That's actually 10th, so that's been good. but opponents are hitting 306 against them. Only the Rockies are allowing a worse batting average. And it's not even BABIP bad luck. Like, yes, at 328, that's a little bit of bad luck, but nothing crazy. It's just been an absolute unmitigated disaster. So the first question I'll get to is from Steven via email. Should the Orioles trade Samuel Basallo to get pitching to save this season? I would say at this point, Basallo is too good of a player to make that move now. Also, with him being on the IL, his value is down more than it would be in 2 weeks, when he comes back to the field. And honestly, one starter right now, even a starter good enough that you would give up Basallo, is not going to fix this team right now. Now, down the line, when they get a little healthier around this rotation, that is when potentially the starter like that, when you'd use Basallo, could really, really help out this rotation and take them like truly, truly to the next level. But right now, it's just, and no one's looking to trade pitching anyway yet. I wouldn't trade Basallo at all. I think he's just too good. But you think about it, because man, is this rotation bad? I don't think that the trade-off is worth it at this point to give a player who could be that much of a star. Next question is from Chase via email. Are the Orioles more likely to trade for a starter, like a legitimate starting pitcher, or for now shop in the bargain bin for help with someone like Tristan McKenzie, who was DFA'd by the Guardians on Monday? I would say right now, the bargain bin is more likely. Now, not Tristan McKenzie. He's cooked right now. He needs Tommy John surgery, I think. We saw how bad his outing was the other night against the Orioles when he was like spiking the ball, throwing it to the backstop, and giving up 4 runs in the 8th inning. But the Orioles' next plan is just going to be, you try and find the next Austin Voth or Spencer Watkins. Like, yeah, those aren't the greatest names in the world, but the Orioles would love an Austin Voth or a Spencer Watkins. Maybe not the current state, because they're both pitching in Asia right now, but the 2022 states of Austin Voth and Spencer Watkins, this rotation would love the versions of those guys. That's how dire straits we are in right now. So you try and pick up one of those guys, a small trade, waiver wire, whatever it may be, just to get you through it. Hopefully, Kyle Gibson presumably is going to be activated and start this Friday in Detroit to join the rotation, kind of take the spot vacated by Brandon Young after his one start over the weekend. Hopefully he can be the Kyle Gibson we saw in 2023. He can give you 6 innings, 3 runs. He can provide just some stability to this rotation right now. We're not asking him to be an ace. We know he's not that at 37, but just some stability would be really, really nice from Gibson. And then you just kind of hope that Zach Eflin returns soon. He threw from 120 feet over the weekend. He said he felt really good, said he's not really feeling the pain, doesn't really feel the injury anymore. So seems like he's sooner rather than later going to be back off the IL. That will be gigantic for this Orioles rotation to get their best and most consistent starter on the team right now. That is Zach Eflin, and that is going to be huge to get him back soon. And you just got to weather the storm until then. And can they get through it? We'll see. And then long term, I think you have to trade for a legitimate starter. If you're going to make the playoffs this year, even if you do weather the storm and get things back on track, you're going to have to trade for somebody before the deadline. Even if it's an Andrew Haney, a Chris Paddock, an Eric Fetty, who's not necessarily going to be a top of the rotation guy, but will stabilize you more in the middle, someone is necessary at least. I'd love Sandy Alcantara if he starts to look better in Miami, but you're going to have to do something to add to this rotation. And then the last question comes from Dominic and others via email. How can the team get through the pitching injuries and move on to be more successful? Just talked about it a little bit, but I would say there's 3 major steps for right now to just weather this storm. Number 1 is Kyle Gibson provides stability. Again, the plan is he'll most likely start Friday in Detroit to make his season debut. Just give us something close to what we saw in 2023. Stabilize this rotation for a few starts. Zach Eflin returns soon. The hope is that by May 2nd, Eflin would be back in this rotation. He can do his usual Zach Eflin, 6 innings, 2 runs ball, just giving you a good chance to win every single time he's out there. They need him desperately right now. So to get him back in a week or 2 would be gigantic. And as long as he's his usual self, not feeling the effects of the injury, that would be outstanding. And then finally, just some stability from Dean Kramer and Tomoyuki Sugano. And that's different stability than from Gibson, because I don't think the Orioles hope that they'll need Kyle Gibson for like a good chunk or the remainder of this season. But the Orioles are planning to use Dean Kramer and Tomoyuki Sugano for most of, if not all of the remainder of the 2025 season in their rotation. Sugano and Kramer were both good in their last starts in the 2 wins against Cleveland during the week in Baltimore. If they can do more of that as these starts continue, that will make this much better. Because Sugano was okay, but Kramer was really, really bad in those first 3 starts. And then he settled it down in start number 4. He's the guy you're kind of counting on to be the steady presence in this rotation right now with Eflin injured. So if Kramer and Sugano can stabilize, Gibson can just be a stopgap, and Eflin can come back, that is how you survive in the next couple of weeks. Offense keeps it going, bullpen pitches well, and you just kind of, you get yourself back to 500 first, and you get yourself above 500 in the next 2 weeks, and then you just kind of go from there. That should be the goal, to just tread some water, and that gets you to hopefully to mid-May when you start to get a healthy Chase McDermott and a healthy Trevor Rogers. Not saying those guys will be in the big league rotation, but back and fully starting in the AAA rotation and better depth options to call on in AAA if you need them, both guys with major league experience. And then that allows you to make a tough Charlie Morton decision if you have to. We talked about it on Monday's episode after Morton's disaster start on Sunday. Unfortunately, there's just not a better option, right? Brandon Young looked okay, but he went back down to AAA. He's really the only guy you want to call up at all from Norfolk right now with all the injuries they've sustained. So Morton is going to make at least one more start. He's probably going to start Saturday in Detroit because Gibson's going to come off Friday, but he'll take the spot vacated by Brandon Young in the rotation. So Morton's still going to have a spot. Then after Saturday in Detroit, the next Morton start would be next Friday, May 2nd at home against the Royals. I think that would be the target date for Zach Eflin at this point to return off the injured list. So if Eflin can come back by then and Morton is bad again in Detroit this weekend, that's your time to kind of make a potentially tough Charlie Morton decision, whether it is putting him in the bullpen as the long man for a little bit or cutting bait entirely, which I think the bullpen would be the first move before they do that, but it is possible. And Morton's been very introspective. It's been interesting to hear him talk about his struggles he's gone through so far. But I'm not even putting it on Morton. It's just about getting through one more Morton start this weekend. And to me, it's kind of like, just win Friday and Sunday in Detroit, and then whatever happens with Morton on Saturday happens. Hopefully he pulls it together, but if he doesn't, maybe that's the last start for him. And if Eflin's good and Gibson comes in, they can just stabilize a little bit better to push themselves further. And then they have McDermott and they have Rogers. And then maybe Grayson comes back. We still haven't heard the second opinion on the MRI of the shoulder, but maybe you get him back. And then you can push yourself towards the second half. You make a deadline addition. You can hopefully get Tyler Wells and Kyle Bradish, maybe even Albert Suarez back in the fold, and just kind of, you got to take it day by day. And that next day is today. It is the Orioles and the Nationals in DC. It is the MASN Cup with the debut of MASN Plus for a 3-game set in our nation's capital. Dean Kramer, looking to stabilize, much better his last time out, 5 1/3 innings of 1-run ball, will take on the left-hander Mitchell Parker, who has been great this year for the Nationals. He's got a 1.85 ERA in 4 starts. Doesn't really strike a lot of guys out, but he's just a menace. He's going to go 6 innings every time he goes out there. We'll see what the O's can do against the lefty Parker. I'll be in the ballpark tonight. Surprisingly, I haven't been to Camden Yards yet this year. I was going to go to the Blue Jay game that got rained out. So my first Orioles game will be on the road. I will be at Nats Park tonight for game 1 of this series. So if you see me around, you're there, let me know, shoot me an email, come say hi. I'd be happy to chat about some Orioles, but hopefully it's a Nats team that's struggling too. They are 9-13. They have their own problems. Hopefully the Orioles can take advantage of that, go and at least win a series. I'd love to see a sweep, but at least win a series, get things back on track and kind of go from there. And it starts tonight with Dean Kramer on the hill. And then I will be back tomorrow recapping everything you need to know from game 1 between the O's and the Nats and getting you any more Orioles updates that you may need. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.